It's Damashe and Michael, just talking tech.
Hey everyone, welcome back to DM34. You can get show notes and more information at yourownpay.com/DM34. I'm at Payon, P-A-Y-O-W-N, and he's
Damashe Thomas, and I'm at Damashe, D-A-M-A-S-H-E on Twitter.
So I wanted to jump into it because we're tracking time and we're talking and it's making me be more alert of what I'm doing and conscious of it. Interesting thing. So yeah, how's it going, Damashe?
It's going great, man. It's going great. Time tracking is something that I really gotta get back into time tracking. When I was
So you did it in the past?
Yeah, I did, man. So I started actually tracking time when I first started using Freshbooks back around 2012. But I was only actually tracking time like when I was, actually working on a project for somebody. So I wasn't doing like full time. Yeah, billing time tracking is what that was. And I did that for a few years. And I would say a couple of years ago, I tried to get more into the actual tracking of all of my activities, what I'm doing, how am I spending my time type of thing. Right. And up until recently, there wasn't really a good solution that was accessible and easy to use on iOS. And I still have an issue with the app that I know you're using, which is Toggl.
I do too.
That it don't have an Apple Watch app. Which after I got my Apple Watch, that's when I really kind of got serious about looking, okay, let me find something because it'll be super easy. I even wrote Freshbooks and was like, man, y'all ain't got no Apple Watch app. What's the problem?
My Apple Watch caused me to start tracking more than just time. Like the rings that you get with the health data on the Apple Watch put me in the mindset of actually tracking things because I find myself using apps like Auto Sleep to track my sleep. I'm tracking how much I'm breathing, and I'm now using Pedometer Plus Plus to compete with Andrew, who now has a Fitbit. So I think just that concept of tracking comes with having an Apple Watch and the ease, and so you expect there to be an app on your watch for time tracking.
Exactly. One of the interesting things about the Apple Watch, and I found this, when I got my first Apple Watch, what was it?
Last
December.
Year
it was December of 2017.
Yeah. I made that mistake earlier when recording. I was recording with Max and I'm all talking. I'm like, wait, no, that was 2017 because we're in 2019 now.
Yeah, I almost did it too. But when I got the watch, I knew things that I wanted to do with the watch, which were, keeping up with notifications, those important notifications. I don't need every notification hitting my watch. I don't have every notification hitting my watch, but those notifications, and then being able to interact with some very specific apps that I knew I was going to use, such as Drafts, Fantastical, Just Press Record,
OmniFocus.
Do
you use OmniFocus a lot from your watch? Because I found I actually really was only adding tasks to the inbox from OmniFocus.
I really don't use it all that much from my watch, to be honest. What I have kind of fallen into doing is sending stuff into Drafts first, and then when I do my review of my inbox and Drafts from my phone, I send necessary tasks over to OmniFocus, which also allows me to kind of go ahead and send them to a project or add a tag or anything like that I'm doing with it as well, which is not as easy or possible for all of those features from the watch.
So let's break that down for people a little bit because it causes me to think, man, we got to take a minute and explain to people, what are we talking about? So when you're throwing when an idea comes to you, your workflow, from what I understand, is you throw it into Drafts and then once a day probably, or if you're guilty like me, multiple times a day, you'll go try to process that and then you'll either run an action that turns that into a project or a task or something like that, or you'll email it if it's something that deals with email, or message it, or just get it out of Drafts so that way you've actually dealt with it. And then you work from your project management or calendar app. Is that how you work?
That's pretty much kind of how that goes, man.
Okay.
I would say the only addition to that processing workflow is that because of Drafts 5 having workspaces available and tags, a lot of times what I'm doing too, and I really find myself doing this quite a bit now with Drafts, even though I have probably 2 or 3 other apps on my phone that used to serve a similar purpose, which is I find myself clipping a lot of information from the web when I'm browsing the web and just dumping it in Drafts. I need to refer back to that article, or I need to read that article.
How?
How? So from iOS, I'm just using the share sheet extension for Drafts.
So you'll select and then share, or do you? Like, do you actually take text from the web page?
It depends. If it's like a snippet or a paragraph or something on the page, yeah, I'll select that and then just share that directly into drafts and put a tag on it, depending on what it's for.
And then automatically append or whatever the URL, so you know where it came from the action.
Yep. And if it's like a full page, like an article or some documentation or something like that, I'll just hit the share button and just share the whole page. And the way I have my template set up for drafts when I use the share extension is it grabs whatever selected text I've selected, if there's any, the page title and the page URL, and puts the page title and page URL in Markdown format. So it's just a clickable link if I'm previewing. And then I apply tags to it right there. But usually when I go through and kind of clear my inbox out, I make sure there's not anything that I've added idea-wise or from anywhere else. And I sort of keep different workspaces for certain things. So like I have one workspace that's, strictly devoted to ideas, articles, help documentation that's related to WordPress development.
So I'm not using workspaces in drafts. So explain that a little bit.
Essentially, and this is the way that I look at it. I'm not going to say it's the official way that the drafts developer would explain this to you, or even anybody else would explain it to you. But the way I'm going to explain workspaces to you is that I consider them to be sort of like saved searches. So for Mac users, you have the ability to save a search in the Finder and always be able to refer back to that. There are several other things you can do with that as well. I think Google Gmail on the web lets you do that. But essentially, I just consider it a saved search or a saved filter for specific items. So you can use tags, since they added tags to Drafts 5. You can use tags. So for example, WPDEV is a tag that I use.
And if I put
exactly. You got it, man. I'm not very imaginative, so it's not very difficult to figure that stuff out. But you create a workspace by saying, okay, I only want things in this workspace that have this tag and don't have that tag, or have this tag and have been added at a certain date. So I really treat them just like a bunch of saved filters or saved search filters that allow me to quickly, retrieve information. Me and you both are working with Desiree on blind employment.
So you can pull up blind employment solution documents and everything. And the cool thing about it is, I don't know if you've explored this or not since AOTD33, but you can leverage workspaces and URL callbacks to jump right into a workspace with Launch Center Pro. So if you're like, hey, I think I want to work on some blind employment solution stuff, you can jump into Launch Center Pro, hit blind employment solutions in drafts, and then it pops that open. And then I've recently gotten real into the groups. A lot of my stuff is getting grouped, so I can start adding more stuff, because I notice the more and more I use Launch, the more
you want to add.
Yeah. So now I've got a group called URL shortcuts that I just double tap that, and that pops open a shortcut, and I slide my finger up, double tap the clicky link, and that drops me literally right into clicky where my stats are. And all it saves me from doing is opening Safari, double tapping on the URL in the address bar, changing my rotor to edit and pasting in the address, or typing CLI and then finding clicky in the auto suggest. But when I started doing it multiple times a day or even just once a day, you realize how much time that saves you, just because it's right there and it's a quick shortcut that you can use. Another one that I have, because sometimes it comes up, is I can quickly jump into the WordPress admin dashboard from Launch Center Pro. And again, it's not having to open Safari, double tap on the URL and start typing in that URL.
Yeah, little things like that are super time savers though, because again, you can do them from where you're thinking about it versus, like you say, jumping into Safari, typing into the URL bar. And oftentimes
I get distracted.
Because you'll open up Safari, right, and there's the page that you were just last looking at, this article or you were reading or something like that, and you're like, oh, let me finish reading this article about this interesting thing. And then you find yourself 2 minutes later, wait, I opened Safari for a whole nother reason, and now I don't even remember what it was.
Oh, something I discovered that kind of relates to that is I've been trying to journal like consistently. I've missed like the last week of journaling, to be honest. I don't know how you're doing with it, if you've done it at all, but The one positive thing about it is now I have a shortcut, and I think I shared it with you. If not, I'll put it in the show notes at yourownpay.com/DM34. And the shortcut prompts me with like 3 questions depending on the day of the week. And then it throws it into a template for day 1, drops it right into day 1, and you hit done. So as I was talking to someone earlier today on an interview, it eliminates the barrier of entry, because literally all I do is I'm like, I really should be journaling right now. So I'll hit launch, and then in the top right corner is add new entry. Add new entry is a shortcut that runs X callback URL, and I'll explain that in a minute. And it starts a Toggl timer, and it asks me these questions, forms that template for the day 1 entry, and then when I hit the done button, the X callback URL sees that the shortcut is complete, and it drops me back into launch, and I can run another shortcut from there.
Man.
So I get excited when I start looking up these entries, and now I got people asking me, well, text expander, how can you use that? And then I learned you can, in a lot of these apps, you can leverage text expander within your shortcuts.
So you can do that with that works with Launch Center Pro, that works with drafts. So you can run actions and drafts that will trigger text expander snippets,
and then get data from that snippet.
And that's one of the most interesting things. Like, oh man, we discussed this back when it happened, when text expander went from a pay for a license every year and a half or so to a subscription, right? And we discussed, I think we discussed that there were some alternatives out there. And I think I told you I wasn't switching because it's too useful. And it didn't make any sense to me to switch. Like I wasn't happy about it. Although conversely, I got to let you in on a little secret. If you ever owned a text expander license before they did that, I have not paid full price for it yet. Shh, don't tell nobody.
And look out for discounts. There are, I'm going to be honest, there are discounts. Like you can typically find like 20% off. I'm being honest. Don't pay full price for text expander unless you really want to. Like I have been paying for it on the monthly basis, but I'm looking with our recent finance changes to changing that to an annual subscription just to help us with budgeting. And while I'm looking at annual subscription, I'm looking at discounts because it drops price down to like $28 a year or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a terrible price considering how much I actually use it, which is on the Mac, on iOS. I mean, I have snippet groups set up just for terminal commands that I type all the time, so I don't have to manually type them out.
Interesting.
And then a lot of the apps, I would say a majority of the apps that I open on a regular basis that have me doing any sort of typing on iOS actually have that direct integration with text expander, which means I don't even have to switch to the keyboard. I don't have to switch to the text expander keyboard, and I also still get to take advantage of certain advanced snippets, such as fill-in snippets.
That's what that means. So I've seen that in, this app is integrated with text expander, and I don't have text expander on my phone. I just use it on the Mac. And so I didn't realize, I'm like, well, cool, you can expand my snippets. And I didn't realize that meant you didn't have to switch to the keyboard.
So here's the key point when it comes to that. Any apps, so Drafts, Launch Center Pro are 2 examples. OmniFocus is another example. They have that direct integration with the text expander SDK. So unlike iOS, the iOS text expander keyboard that only will let you expand text snippets, if you're inside of Drafts and you have a fill-in snippet that you use, you can actually have that pop up as a dialog box in iOS, do your fill-in steps that you do, hit done, and it fills it out the same way it would do on the Mac.
So that is amazing. I'm going to have to play with that. Damashe, real quick, to the newcomer, what is text expander?
Oh man, text expander is something that's going to change your life.
I got put on the spot. I have to do that to you because I got put on the spot earlier for that. So what's text expander, Damashe?
Oh man. I want to hear your answer after this. But text expander is a tool that is cross-platform, works on Mac, iOS, and Windows. And basically it allows you to use shortcuts, a few letters, a phrase, to expand into much larger blocks of text. So on a simple example, and really I think to understand what text expander is, you need examples. If you work in customer service, for example, and you're constantly replying to people's questions about this, that, and the other, well, you usually get down to sort of a science of here's a good response to this type of question, or here's my signature that I want to put at the end of an email. Using text expander, instead of typing out hello blank, insert person's name here, blah, 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 blah. You can have basically a form letter that allows you to fill in specific pieces of information when needed. So an example for me that I use text expander for. I went way off the track with what text expander is. Basically, it lets you expand text.
So did I when I was asked.
But it's so you tell people, it lets you type short snippets or phrases and expands them into much bigger blocks of text.
Right, and that's how I summarize it. It lets you type a snippet and it expands into a bigger block of text. So it lets you save time by, and the example I use was semicolon M for my email.
Yeah, I mean, that's a simple one. Or, I have, I have several different snippets for different addresses. So I don't.
Semicolon PH for phone number?
Yeah.
But then you were going to explain an advanced one, weren't you?
Yeah, so like an advanced snippet that I have been using, I haven't used it as much lately, but I used to use it quite a bit when working for somebody that, I was dealing with customer service requests. Usually in this specific context, people were going to ask one of three questions most of the time. So what I did is built a fill-in snippet that would it ran a little bit of AppleScript, so it wouldn't work on iOS, but it would grab the person's name from the email field in the mail app, insert that at the top. So it says, hi, insert their name here. My options were, I had a big block of text, a couple of paragraphs at the top that says, thanks for reaching out to us. Sorry to hear that you're having problems, blah, 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 niceties. And then it got to the point of their message. So if they asked about how do I download this book, I had a fill-in answer for that because it was just straightforward.
Right.
Go here, do this,
from a
do
combo
this.
box, pretty much.
I picked
from a pop-up while you were filling that snippet.
Yeah, so I picked from a pop-up in the snippet. One option was telling them how to download the book. One option was telling them how to log into their account. And then I had
reset their password or something like that. Yeah,
that was the third option, was actually how to reset your password.
Yeah.
And then the fourth option was just a blank text field, so if I chose the fourth option, it meant there was something custom, right? Because it wasn't one of those things. So I'll type that in. It filled in the final, thanks for blah, blah, blah. Let us know if you have any more trouble. My signature at the end, and then I would hit done. Essentially, I would not have to type anything unless it was a custom answer that I needed to give. I would. And
then he didn't even type that; he just dictated it, and then
pretty much. I hit done, and it is filled out of the entire email. But two things: it saves me a lot of time, but then two, it also had consistency, right? So anytime I responded to an email, people got consistent responses. Consistent with the way that the company wanted their responses to their customers to look. So that's another reason that you want to look at Text Expander.
Talking about time saving, I don't know if you have access to your information while I'm going over this. I'm looking at stats, just so you know. Talking about time saving, I don't know when the last time I reinstalled Text Expander on the computer, and it does reset every time you install it on the computer. So I've, at this time, expanded 613 snippets, saved 26,256 characters, and at 60 words per minute, I've saved 1.46 hours, which is impressive when you look at it, because I know that I've been only using Text Expander on this computer since the beginning of December. Could have been late November, but it hasn't been that long. And to realize that that's how much time I've saved. And I am guilty of, I need to go through and clean up my Text Expander snippets because
don't we all?
you get it. So this totally went off track, but kind of, yeah, I need to clean up Text Expander snippets.
Yeah. I got snippets in here that I added years ago that I don't even use.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I look at them.
And then you'll go remove them, and then you're like, wait, what was that snippet? And then you start using Text Expander, and then you use a snippet that you reflexively use that maybe you change. Yeah, it can be addictive.
Yeah. The thing that I have started to do, one is group snippets. So put snippets into groups that sort of make sense. So like I mentioned the terminal snippets that I use. I just have a group called Command Line, and those work on the Mac. They work in Linux when I'm SSH'd into a Linux server. And what I have started to do also with groups, so when you create a group and you put snippets inside of a group, one thing you can do, of course, you can name the group, but you can also set up a default portion that you want to be the snippet. So for example, I forget exactly what they're called. I'll tell you in a sec. But my command line group snippet, everything in that group is going to start with CLI dash.
Prefix.
Yep. Prefix. There you go. Knew there was a word for that.
I knew when you told me, I thought that's what you were saying, but I'm like, maybe he's talking about something else.
Oh, and I do the same thing for referral links. So all of my referral links are in a group called affiliate, and all of them start with something. I don't know.
So you set that based on your group?
I set it based on a group most times. Yeah. But that's how you create it. So that way, like for referral links or affiliate links, you can you don't really have to. And I've also tried not to be too complicated with my snippets as I've been creating them lately. So, for example, my Namecheap affiliate link is just AFL, Namecheap, right? I mean, I'm typing out a whole word. It seems like it doesn't seem like I'm actually saving a lot of time, but I really am because I don't have to remember that link.
You don't have to look that link up, copy and paste it, or remember it. Or you don't have to go and do what I used to do and set up subdomains to redirect people to affiliate links, or install a plugin and put that load on your website. Like there's a lot of other ways to do it, but once you set up a system, and systems are very important, you'll know how much time you're spending on each of your tasks. I don't know if that was a good transition.
It was, because I was going to say, yeah, speaking of that, so let's circle back to this whole Apple Watch thing. Oh, man. To wrap up a thought that we did start with, though, the Apple Watch. So after getting the watch and starting to use it, I was surprised, and Mike, I think you are right, that, once you start getting notifications about how many steps you've taken and how many times you stood today, and you start to see those rings close, it not only, for me at least, it started making me a little bit more health conscious than what I was being, to the point that I started like you tracking, making sure I breathe, do the breathe exercises. I'm actually thinking about taking up yoga.
Interesting. That's very, very interesting, because I had that same thought a couple weeks ago. So
yeah, it's something I can do that is like one reason I don't get a lot of exercise, because I can't really exercise in my house in the traditional sense of like.
What's wrong, Damashe? You can't run around the kitchen?
Yeah, exactly.
Circles, chasing the kids.
I do get some pretty good days. Most times, Mike, if you see my days or exercises really up, I've been chasing the kids. Yep. I've been chasing the kids. If you see his way up, but
I can see when Damashe is babysitting, because I'm like, oh, Damashe's activity's up today. He must be after the kids today.
That's exactly what it is. That is exactly what it is. But I do want to do more exercise, and there's not really a good space for me. I would feel stupid, first of all, and it would get pretty boring also, and I would feel like I was just looking like a doofus, running back and forth in the yard, just back and forth, just to try to close it. Like, I don't want to do that. So
I'm competing with a blind guy in Oregon you can't see. That's why I'm doing it. Come on.
So, but yeah, so yoga is a thing I'm thinking about taking up, just for the benefits of getting some actual exercise and working my muscles. I'm trying to stay limber, man. I'm starting to get a little bit older, so don't want to be able to. I don't want to become that dad that calls his kid in the room in the morning and put my shoes on, because I can't bend over that far.
He wants to see his grandkids. That's what he wants. We'll talk more about Damashe's future aspirations as a dad come this spring. Keep an ear out for it.
Oh yeah. Oh man, now you're gonna make us have to release the show by this spring.
Oh, we need to do something. It gives us a deadline.
I know, right? It does.
We've been talking about for over a year now.
We've been talking about this for a year, man. We do need to do that though. We gotta get Marlon on his microphone. But yeah, I mean, having an Apple Watch for me, at least, like it did start making me more aware, and I do really want to be able to track my time from the watch. Unfortunately, I don't really know of a good way to do that. But Mike, tell me a little bit more about how you're using Toggl, because I tried out Toggl, and I'm not gonna say it didn't stick. I just didn't apply the necessary.
I get it.
Time to start setting it up right.
Well, and it also takes time to actually use it every day, and that's something that I had to learn. Like, if you listen to yourownpay.com/AOTD22, there'll be a link over there at our show notes. I'm not going to repeat it, because then that's repeating the URL way too many times. But you'll be able to hear some of the, or you'll be able to see some of the time tracking results that are received after using Toggl for about 14 days. What I ended up doing is I have a couple of primary projects. One of them, which is podcast listening, is something that I do quite often, and it's not associated with a project itself. So it's listed in my reports as uncategorized or something, which means that my greatest quantity of time is uncategorized. But then I also have household chores, which includes doing dishes or laundry. And then I've also got a category category called YOPN, and within those categories, I have tags such as traffic generation. And one example of the projects that I did this morning is interact on Reddit. And that was the name of the task that I was working on. So when I opened the Toggl app on my iPhone and I double tapped on the start button in the bottom of the app, I was prompted with an edit box and the timer started immediately. And so I used dictation to say that I was interacting on Reddit. Then above the keyboard, there are buttons that appear. And one of those is a button that says BTN project add. And when I double tap on that, I can add. There you go. You had to throw me off. But when I double tap on that, it will put the edit box to where I can start typing the name of a project. So I would type YOPN and then I explore at the top of the screen and see YOPN. When I split tap, which is what I typically do there, that will add the YOPN project to that particular task. And then the next button over, typically above the U and I keys, is the tags button. And you can split tap on that or double tap on that and add tags. So for the interacting on Reddit, I added the traffic generation tag to it. So that way at the end of the week, I can go and hopefully look at all of my tags and see how much time I spent on traffic generation. And I say hopefully because the reports tab, which is in the center of the screen as explained on AOTD, is not the most accessible, but you can get information from it, if that makes sense. Like you can explore the screen and see it, but it's not laid out the best. But you can get your information from it.
Hey man, you gotta learn how to explore your screen. I don't think flicking is going to always benefit people, especially nowadays. And we're starting to see more and more of that. Just as a side note for anybody not familiar, when Mike says split tap, what he means is he's exploring his screen with one finger. When he locates the element that he wants to activate, he just taps the screen with a second finger without lifting up the first finger. Again, that is one of those functions and features that has actually been in VoiceOver from at least my beginning with VoiceOver on iOS.
For a while. Now, that sounds like a very complicated process. So let me give you one more quick example and I'll explain it. So I have another project that I work on called Dishes. That's in the household category. Actually, it's in the category called household chores. There's no tag on it.
You know, all this stuff sounds more complicated when you're trying to explain it to someone.
Right? But to simplify that process, instead of having to go into Toggl, hit the start button, type in dishes every time, I can type DI and at the top of my screen, I'll see dishes with the template already filled out. So I can split tap on that and then it'll start doing that. Or even faster than that, you will, when you do open the Toggl app, see your 4 most active timers that you've set, and you can just, it'll say, what are you doing right now? And you can just double tap on one of those 4 timers. And then underneath those 4 timers, you'll see a heading that'll say today, followed by the amount of time you've tracked today, and then each item that you've tracked for the day. And you can navigate by headings in order to skip day by day. And then each item, you can use your rotor actions to flick down to continue a timer, delete a timer, or activate, which will allow you to edit when the timer started and when it stopped. So hopefully that's a good brief tutorial on the app. And then there's 3 tabs across the bottom. The left one is timer, middle one is reports, and the right one is today.
Calendars. Oh, no. Today?
Today.
It tells you how long it's been. It's been a while.
Well, it might be calendar too, but it shows you what I see, because again, they're not labeled. So that's the way I envision them in my mind. So what I see there is a list of what I was doing every hour. And then the cool thing about it is shortcuts. I'm starting to use Toggl shortcuts more in my workflows, which has pros and cons. And the other cool thing is you can't have 2 toggles running at once. So which has pros and cons. You can go back and edit a toggle so they can overlap, which I didn't realize that, but I did figure that out with support. So let's say that I run that good morning shortcut that I mentioned in last week's episode. The first thing it does now is it starts a toggle that says that I'm podcast listening, because that's the last thing I'll do. But the first thing that I'm going to forget to start is my Toggl timer to say that I'm listening to podcast. podcast. So I at least log an hour or two in the morning, even if that's not all I'm doing in the morning, because I know throughout the day I'm going to forget to hit the toggle button in order to track time for podcast listening. So that's kind of my little hack around it. And I get why it doesn't work for everyone, because it's a mindset change. You have to change your mindset to go in and say, well, what am I going to be working on? And as I said in the podcast, you have to focus on that task, because if you start doing podcast listening and while you're doing that, I'll explain that in a second. While you're doing that, you're building a website for JR, and then you're doing something else related to websites. You won't be able to adequately track what you're doing. So in that case, I typically figure out which project am I working on the most. Yes, I'll be doing some subtasks, but what am I going to be working on the most? Primarily, I'm working on Reddit posts, for example. Well, yeah, that's going to involve some research, but I'm going to track that as Reddit posting, because that research is involved in posting on Reddit, so that we actually sound like someone who knows what the hell they're talking about.
Makes sense.
It does come with that conscious effort. And then if you forget to, it's very easy, at least on the Mac and iOS. I don't know about using the website because I don't use the website. They do have a Toggl button that you can use from the website. I don't know how easy it is to edit there, but on the Mac and on iOS, it's very easy to modify your start time. So one thing that I forgot to do is start tracking time for the interview that I was doing. And while we were doing the interview earlier today, I went back and I added all those details, and it was very easy to edit that information.
Yeah. You're right about it being a mindset. I mean, it's a mindset period for a lot of things that are going to help you with productivity. Any product, I put time tracking into that category, because one thing, Mike, that I realized that you're doing that, just to kind of spell it out for people that are listening, is the reason that Mike is tracking stuff like his Reddit research and podcast listening and doing dishes is because he's not only trying to track time for billable purposes, but just to see how he's spending his day. How productive is he being versus how productive he thought he was being, which is a real thing. This is a real thing. You may not believe it, but I promise you can spend your whole day and feel like, well, oh man, I don't know what I did. I think I did a lot of stuff. And if you were actually tracking your time, and I realized this on a personal level when I had an app installed on the Mac called Timing. Mm-hmm. Which does not have an iOS equivalent, which is what made me start looking at Toggl. But one feature that Timing has, and Toggl has this feature on the Mac as well, there's no way to do it on iOS. But what they have on the Mac is the ability to automatically track everything you're doing. So it'll show you when you look at your reports at the end of the day or whenever you get around to looking at them. If you're like me, it might be 2 or 3 days later.
Or once a week, like Toggl email you, so you don't have to look at them unless they email you Monday morning.
Yeah, what they'll show you on the Mac is, so what Timing was showing me is where I was actually spending time. So what websites I was on, which apps I had open. To a certain extent, if I was in something like, say, TextMate or TextEdit, it would show me which documents I actually had open. It would show me which terminal tabs I had open. So while I may have thought the past 4 hours, I was working on this website, working in the terminal over here, building this server and doing all this stuff and blah, blah, blah. Hell, well, man, you spent 45 minutes in Twitter when you opened it up just to send out a tweet, right? But I didn't think I was in Twitter for 45 minutes. So that's why Mike is tracking everything that he's doing, and that's why it's a mindset, because you can't really figure out where you're being productive and where you're not being productive until you have a what's known as a baseline of what your normal behavior is. Like, you don't know what's abnormal until you know what's normal.
Let us know how you're tracking your time, or if that's something you're interested in learning more about over at yourownpay.com/DM34. I'm at Payon, Payown on Twitter. He is at Damashe, Damashe. Damashe, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, we're going to change your Twitter name to AOTD. He loves this show, folks. Catch you guys in a couple of weeks.
You've been listening to Your Own Pay Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, visit yourownpay.com/cast for exclusive content and to contact us today. We're eager to hear your thoughts and about how you're making this podcast your own. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon. The Your Own Pay Podcast, yourownpay.com.